Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. The session is dealing with a rather interesting and topical subject, and I'm not sure precisely how to approach it. There are so many aspects and so many angles that one can really examine and look at. In recent years, obviously, especially in the case of the Arab Spring, there were a lot of explanation about the reasons and the backgrounds to the kind of Arab uprising, and one of the major explanatory factor that people forwarded, certainly with Tunisian events and after that with Egyptians, was that new technology was absolutely crucial and essential, and you couldn't even begin to understand what was happening. In many cases, and in many fronts, that was the only explanation that was offered. So we had terms such as Twitter revolution, Facebook revolution, WikiLeaks revolution. Many people basically tried to kind of understand and explore and begin to kind of theorize those revolutions and social movements in terms of the impact of the new technologies. We had been there before, back in 2009 during the Iranian uprising. Again, the idea of the Twitter revolution became so important and so significant, and also the only way that many people actually started to understand and to theorize some of those developments. Obviously, we all know the revolutions are much older concepts than new technology. We have had the revolution way before the coming of the YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and television and radio and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean actually they're not important or not significant, but nevertheless I think there has to be that kind of separation made in the beginning, and look at we need to kind of look at the broader historical issues and historical context. In the case of the explanation or technology being forwarded as the major explanatory factor, as far as I can see it, and as I remember kind of watching television and reading the newspapers, it came to kind of be regarded or rather actually used as a substitute for local knowledge. I remember watching an ITV correspondent being in Tahrir Square as people were kind of being jubilant and very active and participating and singing and demonstrating and kind of shouting and chanting. The ITV journalist just shoved the microphone to the face of one of the demonstrators and asked, "This is a Twitter revolution, isn't it?" And the guy just looked at him and said, "Just look. Do you see anything else beside the Twitter here? Nothing else matters to you?" I think for many people, certainly, the way that they were analyzing it and describing it, it was a brilliant way of not really saying anything about the social movement, not saying anything about the history, not saying anything about the other reasons other than Twitter. It was a basic shorthand in order to kind of brush aside anything that matters. And we know again from historical factors and experiences that you can't really make any changes without the people being there. I think one of the major problems with those technological determinist argument was to brush aside the role of the people and the people being at the center of the social change and making those changes possible, regardless of whether actually there is this or that technology available. And before that, we never basically suggested that the French Revolution was a newspaper revolution, or the major revolutions back in the 1980s and the collapse of the communism in East and Central Europe. Nobody explained them or described them as a television revolution, even though television was pretty significant, one of the major medium at that time. So in recent, it has become pretty much a polarized debate, and increasingly it appears, at least if you read some of the commentaries, if you read some of the analysis, it appears that the world is no longer divided into the camps that we knew. Now the camp, or the two major camps that appear consistently, is the camp of the believers and non-believers. Believers in the role of the technology and non-believers in the role of the technology. Again, I think that's a very significant point to remember. If one forwards technologies as a major factor or as one of the kind of key reasons, then by definition we have to kind of demonstrate that it happens almost everywhere and without exception. And if that's the case, then we are actually confronted with two set of questions. One, why it happened in Tunisia and Egypt, for example, and not in the case of Iran? What were the other kind of differences between those two those experiences? After all, one could argue that Iran or Iranian people back in 2009 were pretty much a vanguard of using those technologies. They were quite innovative and creative, and in many ways the experiences actually was taken by the Egyptians and Tunisians, revolutionaries and activists. So how come it didn't happen in Iran? Why in Tunisia? Why in Egypt and not in the case of Iran? How come the Iranian 2009 uprising didn't produce the same result? Considering that there were so many similarities, certainly in terms of the using technology. So that's one question I think we need to remember, and it's important to ask. The second question is, had it not been for the new technology, had it not been for the Facebook or Twitter or and YouTube, WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, whatever, would it be possible to imagine that Ben Ali would have been deposed? Would it be possible to imagine that perhaps Mubarak would have left? Had it not been for those, in my view, it would have happened. I think Tunisian revolution had not a lot to do with the technology, and Egyptian also uprising and revolution, and an ongoing revolution as we speak, didn't happen. Just remember that, let's say, in recent months, when they started, well, previously it wasn't regarded as a Twitter revolution and Facebook revolution, but if you remember, none of the journalists, none of the commentators raised the same issue when the movement started again in recent months. We haven't heard the term Twitter revolution when the people actually started, thousands and thousands of them started gathering in Tahrir Square again, trying to kind of anyway get rid of the military rule. And during the election, again, that was not the issue that was raised. So I think these are significant points that we need to remember. But nevertheless, I think looking at some of the possible issues, it's important, first of all, to acknowledge what is it that the social media and the internet offers, and in what way they might be regarded as new, and what aspects of those understanding and explanation misses the much bigger picture, actually ignores even the realities of the internet as we speak. In terms of the advantages of the social media, I'm sure most of us are familiar with that, or with those advantages. In the first place, there is the significant issue of the low barrier to entry. If you want to launch a newspaper, if you want to launch a satellite television, if you want to launch a company with significant medium which attracts a large number of audiences, that is a very, very expensive activity and almost impossible. We all know, people actually have been involved in social movements know how hard it is to kind of have the resources. It's no longer let's say mid-1840s where, let's say, 250 activists could get together, raise some money and launch a newspaper that might be labeled as the Northern Star. We're not living in that period. We're not even living in the period of, let's say, early 20th century where there was a possibility for a trade union to run a radical newspaper, a working class newspaper. So actually that low barrier to entry is a significant factor. Anybody at the moment can go and launch a blog or have a Facebook or perhaps tweet. Yeah. That's easy. I think that's one factor, and one of the major reasons why so many people actually migrated to the net in order to express themselves. The other advantage that it offers is a possibility of creation of a kind of, in a way, publication sphere, that you can gather a large number of people, perhaps a large number of people, have a debate, have a discussion, and perhaps even actually come to some decisions and try to kind of organize some dissents and some sort of activities. Again, that is an advantage which has been with us since at least the Seattle in 1999, and people have used that experience more recently in the case of the Occupy movements in the UK, in the United States, and many other countries. So that's again one significant advantage. The other advantage that it has offered, certainly in many places, it has allowed for many activists to kind of in a way explore and report from the experience and also cover the issues that are not covered by the mainstream journalism. In the case of Iran, for example, back in 2009, because the journalists were not there, because the newspapers were heavily being censored, because the foreign journalists were kicked out and so on and so forth, internet became a significant kind of in a way tool to report back, to send the images and upload them. Even in the case of countries such as UK and United States, because the mainstream media do not show any interest or have no interest in covering those issues. Again, it has offered the advantage of exploring and reporting some of those issues, something which generally comes under the labor of the citizen journalist and citizen journalism. So that's, again, possibly one good advantage. Another issue, or rather another kind of in a way significant advantages that it offers, or has the potential to offer, is generating international and national solidarities. This is, again, in the case of the working class movement, is not new. I think, again, we have to remember the history. Certainly in the case of working class movement, we've had that sense of solidarities and collective actions from back in the old days. So one has to go back and, for example, look at the Chartist movement, that the way that many activists and many socialists were involved from Germany, from Poland, from Netherlands, from France, from United States. Oh, I'm running out of time quickly. And it has been there, and one of the major kind of in a way records of those historical development was written by a German, as we know. Fast forward to Russian Revolution, again, a large number of activists from different countries were there, actively supporting the revolution, actively participating in the revolution back in 1917. And again, one of the most memorable record of that period is written by an American journalist, as we know. Fast forward again to the Spanish Civil War. So in terms of the kind of international solidarity, this is not as if internet actually has offered something we never had before. Although granted, one can argue that it has been expanded and it's much more widespread at the moment and perhaps even quicker. Those are some of the advantages that it offers, but at the same time there are a number of significant problems that we have to acknowledge and recognize. In the first place, there is the problem of the digital divide and access. A large number of people, certainly in the case of the Arab world, as I know it, and in the case of Iran, do not have access to internet. Access to internet is very, very limited, very, very narrow, and confined to a very small minority. And of those, not everybody uses the internet. So it's not just the question of physical access, but also the usage. Not many people actually kind of in a way go and use it as a revolutionary tool. Facebook is full of people going and commenting, such as, I had a lot of cheese, today I look like a cheese. It's not the internet actually which turns those cheese eaters into revolutionists, but the actual kind of in a way participation in the emergence of the mass movement, that suddenly the cheese eaters become kind of in a way active participants, let's say in Tahrir Square or in Solar Square or in Pearl Square, in different kind of in a way squares and public spaces in different places. It's not the internet actually that makes them into a public, but the gathering of people, which suddenly every single individual becomes part of the public. I think the significance of those squares, such as Tahrir Square, Solar Square, Pearl Square, are far, far, far away the internet and the Facebooks and so on and so forth. Is the reality on the ground. So that's one issue we need to remember. In many cases, also internet is a monitored space. It's not open to everybody as such, and it's controlled. In some cases, let's say in the case of Iran, you have the issues of regular kind of censorship, you have the issues of the speed of the internet, the fact that, as happened in the case of Tunisia and Egypt and Iran, that they can switch off the whole network altogether as a way of trying to kind of stop the movement. So that's been one of the kind of significant news conveniently ignored by many commentators when it comes to that. Internet also, we know from a fact, it's a very segmented public. If it can be called a public, it's definitely a segmented public. There are diversities, there are variations, there are different politics, and I'm not even sure actually it's the best way to bring people together. Imagine, let's say, imagine internet as a kind of in a way big park, such as Hyde Park. Yes, there are various groups and activities, but people actually are separate, are detached from each other. Somebody's picnicking there, another group are there, some group actually playing football there. It's not necessarily the case that suddenly everything in the Hyde Park and all the kind of anyway camps coming together. And the same thing is true in the case of the internet. It's very segmented and very kind of in a way detached and isolated in many cases. So that's another kind of in a way issues. Social media, as far as I understand it, also can be explained as a gated communities. Again, it's not an open platform for everybody. If I want to join you as a friend on Facebook, I have to kind of anyway apply, and then you have to accept me. That actually happens across the board. It's not an open community, equally accessible and equally kind of anyway open to everybody that we know, every single activist. It remains pretty much closed to so many people and to so many fronts. There is also another, certainly that was true in the case of Iran, something very parochial about digital activism. If you compare, let's say, the case of Iran in 2009 with that of the 1979 revolution, I mean, one of the key contrasts was that back in 1979, every single kind of communication that was coming, either in the case of the leaflets or in the case of the tape recorder, were being made available to almost everybody. So people had access to them. In contrast, in 2009, that was not the case. That remained very, very narrow. And only a very small group of activists actually had access to them and were kind of in a way debating those issues. Compare and contrast that with the case of Egypt, in which many activists were printing those and distributing in the shanty towns, in the working class neighborhoods, and so on and so on. That was one of the key differences, for example, between the experience of Egypt and the experience of Iran. Iran did not manage to move beyond that narrow confine, at least Iranian activists, for a number of reasons, didn't manage to go beyond that confined kind of spaces of the activists themselves who had the access to the internet and who were interested in that subject. Perhaps that was one of the reasons many labeled the Iranian uprising back in 2009 also as a middle class revolution, because it was pretty much confined to those groups. So in many cases, if I wanted to summarize, there are significant areas that we can explore. It offers a number of possibilities that it certainly can be good for many activists and for revolutions across the globe, but that is just that, not a lot of it. We should really have certain hypes about it and assume it's the best thing since the sliced bread. That is not the case, and the evidence actually doesn't show that has been the case. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gholam. I want to hand over now to our next speaker, and it's Clare Solomon. Clare has edited this book, Springtime, The New Student Rebellions, and there are copies of it on Houseman's stall down on the mezzanine floor. So I'll hand over to Clare now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and also thank you to Gholam for speaking with me in advance to ensure that we don't repeat each other. Basically, my argument is as follows: that we need a proper theoretical appraisal of the changes of the last 10 years and their implications for socialists. And we need to adopt a whole new way of working based on the theoretical appraisal. We need political publications that take full advantage of the opportunities online, and that none of this is possible without a new open culture within the organisation. This microphone has all of a sudden gone really loud, isn't it? Is that feeding back at the back now? No, okay. Just wanted to talk a little bit about knowledge and where we get it from, really, because I think this is quite central to what we do as political activists. That everything that we know, everything that we learn about the world is through our engagement with the world. You learn not to fall over by falling over. You learn not to touch the cooker because the cooker is hot. We learn language through communicating with people, and we learn how to organise with each other when we do it collectively. And we can't just be told what to do. And this is one of the reasons why we want people to not only be interested in the world, but actively seeking to change it. As Marx says in the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, philosophers have hitherto tried to understand the world, but the point is to change it. But the knowledge that we have, and the knowledge that's all around us, is constantly being hammered by the ideas of, the ruling class. Marx again famously said, the ideas of every epoch are those of the ruling class, from what we're taught in school to what the government and the media pump out. They have much more of a monopoly over what is being said than what we would like to understand about the world. And you only have to look at the whole media scandal, corruption in the summer, where you can see the connections between the media, the government and the state. Obviously, there have been massive transformations in communication technology for thousands of years. The most knowledgeable one that we know the most about is that of the printing press. Prior to the printing press, knowledge, the printing press is when knowledge started to become sort of formalised. Prior to then, myths and religions and stories and so on were transmitted orally between people. And many, many people had many, many different versions of the stories being passed on. But when the printing press was invented, people then decided what did and didn't go into a particular book or a pamphlet or whatever. You look at the Bible, which is called the Book of Books. It originally had 19 books written by women, but actually only those written by men were included in the final edit. I look at encyclopedias, and if you compare the definition of, say, a woman in the 1700s compared to what would be written in an encyclopedia now, quite different understandings and different definitions of things. And now we have the internet, and what a guy called Clay Shirky says, we have many-to-many communication. Prior to that, we had printing presses, which were just a handful of unelected people making decisions about what was or isn't in those publications. And now we have the internet, where anybody supposedly can contribute, although Gholam has already picked up on a number of those points already. And here's where we start to see many differences in the approach to what it means to be an activist. There's the idea that the internet is horizontal, that anybody can contribute. What Clay Shirky calls ridiculously easy group formation, that if you want to dress up as a mermaid anywhere in the world, you can tag your photo being dressed as a mermaid, and all of a sudden you're in a group with lots of other people dressed as mermaids. He calls this ridiculously easy group formation. However, amongst all these voices on the internet, amongst all these different people that are contributing, we still have the ideas of the ruling class permeating through. So how do we know which voices are worth listening to? I mean, if you look at Wikipedia, this is one of the classic examples that's used, that anybody can edit a page, anyone can go on there, well, if you know how to, I still haven't worked it out myself. But actually, there is no democratic decision about what does become the final edit on that page, and often it's the people with the access to the internet much more than other people that will have the final say without any democracy within it. What actually happens is that in what people call the horizontal movement is that groups or organisations end up becoming run, decisions are being made by people that aren't elected at all, and Joe Friedman calls this the tyranny of structurelessness, which is why we need democratic organisation. I want to talk a bit about spontaneity, because people often say that the good thing about the internet is that people can just be spontaneous and these things can just happen. And people argue that we don't need leadership within the within society because these things just happen. In fact, we had a perfect example of this with the Egyptian revolution. People say, people just spontaneously turned up in Tahrir Square. But actually now, in fact, we've used the image for this in one of our publications downstairs. Actually, we learn that a month or so prior to the occupation of Tahrir Square, there was an actually fully planned out operation in Cairo where people designed and distributed flyers and posters and distributed them across Cairo to see if they could get them past the Mubarak censors. And so the whole thing wasn't just spontaneous, it was actually fully planned. But what Gramsci says is that in the most spontaneous movements, it's simply the case that the elements of conscious leadership cannot be checked. They have left no reliable document. Indeed, it never occurs to them that their history might have some possible importance, that there might be something valuable in leaving documentary evidence of it behind. And further in a book called the modern section called The Modern Prince in the Prison Notebooks, he's talking about spontaneity and conscious leadership. Gramsci talks about the newspaper that he was involved in at the time, L'Ordine Nuovo, where many people contributed to it, trying to get workers to sort of report about their lives and a wide section of society. And so Gramsci says, the act of writing about struggle by the participants is central to the formation of class consciousness. It's essential to what we know about the world. He says this has implications for the role of the revolutionary publication. It means that a publication is not just vital as a propagandist, as an agitator, and an organiser, but actually plays a central role in the formation of the class for itself. And I'll come back to this in a bit. This is the first time I've used an iPad to do a speech, and I keep deleting bits accidentally. It's typical in a meeting about the internet. But further, he says, by writing about the day-to-day struggles, workers connect those struggles with a sense of history. What lies behind documenting your struggles is the understanding that in the future, others will learn from them, that your struggle is part of an unbroken thread of resistance, stretching back in history and reaching forward into the future. Once workers think about their struggle in this manner, they transcend their immediate demands around which the struggle is fought and connect it with the historical mission of the working class to reshape society in its own interests. So, for example, talks about when people go on strike, where they're striking only about economic issues, about their wages or whatever, that by linking their struggles, the struggle ceases to become about the immediate economic interests, but instead becomes part of a bigger picture, and in doing so ceases to be an act of spontaneity, but an act of conscious leadership. And every revolution in technology springs new forms of organisation by both the ruling class and by political organisations trying to smash the ruling class, I suppose. You know, the levellers, John, I'm pretty sure will talk about this a bit more, when they managed to get hold of the printing press for the first time, were able to produce pamphlets and propaganda and, you know, challenging the ideas of the ruling class. But like any other technological advance, we should not simply have just a for or an against attitude. Imagine if people started asking, you know, the steam train, for or against the revolution, the rifle, can it serve the revolution? It's all too easy to see in these cases what the answer should be. Hang on, gone up again. So if it's Trotsky's propaganda train, for example, it is serving the revolution. If it's a train making a profit, it's not. If it's a rifle in the hands of the Red Guards, it's serving the revolution. If it's in the hands of the White Guards, it's not. And so when I want to finish off on why we have revolutionary publication based on the internet. In What Is to Be Done, Lenin talks about why we need revolutionary publications. Again, sort of similar to what Gramsci picked up on. Lenin argues that workers will not spontaneously understand the world just by fighting battles over wages with their employees. Lenin argues that we need to be organised. Lenin argues that to understand politics, you must understand all of society, not just workers and their economic struggles with their employers. To become political, workers need to learn about all of society and not just their own corner of it. And he talks about networks of militant agents. And this is where the internet comes into its own, really. I'll talk about that just in a sec. But again, the revolutionary publication isn't just to educate and publish good stories, but to actually organise ourselves to create the publication collectively, to create a class for itself, and to ensure democracy within the organisation. Lenin argues that in order to have democracy in the organisation, we need a heterogeneous number of ideas, having discussions, debates and arguments and coming together to form a democratic decision or to take a democratic decision within the organisation. And what I quite like is the example of Lenin and the newspaper that they had back in Russia. You know, it'd be printed, it'd be organised and written for and designed and whatever in a central printing press. And then in order to be able to get the newspaper out across Russia and wherever, it would then be put, you know, in the hands of somebody, onto a train. That person would then go to a town, meet up with another somebody, put it into their hands. They would then take it on a bus, go into a village, talk to somebody else, and that whole process along the way, people would be talking to each other. What's going on in your area? Well, you know, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Here, you know, ensuring this maximum democracy within the organisation, because then those examples would then come back on the bus, on the coach, on the train, back to the printing press, back to the organisation to, you know, really find out what was going on in Russia. And this is again where you see the internet, where people can actually do this, and people do have discussions on Facebook, on websites, on Twitter. People are arguing with each other all the time. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that, like I said before, that all of the ideas are, you know, untainted by ruling class ideas, and we have to find a way of running an online publication that is both open and democratic. And in terms of access to the internet, I think that's a really good point, because a lot of people say, but not everybody has internet. Back when the newspaper was invented, when Lenin had the newspaper as a political organiser, actually, what was it, 90% of people couldn't read. And so what Lenin and his comrades would do would stand up and actually read the newspaper to people in large meetings, in union meetings, in, you know, in events in towns and cities across Russia. And this is what they did also in Tahrir Square. They would take videos from the internet, download them onto a laptop, and they would organise collectively meetings within Cairo, or in fact across Egypt, where they were able to access the things that are on the internet that they might not be able to if they don't have the, you know, the Wi-Fi or the connection at home. So I think this is how we have to think about it in terms of political organisation. If people don't have it, we have to try and you know, take the things from the internet to other people. So, I mean, we can't have closed channels of communication. We need to make sure that things are open and democratic. And now that everybody thinks that they can contribute, this is one of the things about the internet. Everyone thinks that they do have a say, that they are able to speak, that they do have an opinion, that we have to ensure that our political organisations take all this on board in order to shape our politics. And this is why, just last sentence, this is why I would argue, yes, the internet is serving the revolution, but only if it's in the hands of a properly democratic organisation. Thank you. Is it on actually? That's need to switch it.
Yeah, okay, that is quite loud. I just wanted to ask both of you, if you don't mind addressing...
Maybe it's...
Back to the wall. You face the front, back to the front. That's it.
Okay, back to the wall. Back to the wall?
Yeah, go back.
It's like a dance.
Performance of politics.
I think that...
Should we use this one?
May I just speak?
You can't be in one line with the loudspeakers.
Where's the loudspeakers?
The wall behind you. She's in front of him, that's why it's being back.
I should be behind them.
Okay.
Okay, against the wall.
Keep it away from you.
Okay, hopefully this is going to work. I think that one of the biggest problems with the internet is this like 10-second soundbite culture that we're acquiring. And you brought up the issue of publications and connecting with the struggles of the past, and I just wonder to what extent we expect people to read in detail, to be well informed about the struggles of the past and take those lessons into the future, because it seems to me that we're sort of deteriorating, our ability to pay attention for more than a couple of seconds is deteriorating. And I think in Facebook, Twitter, these are all, like 5-second, 10-second attention grabbers. So if you can address how we can
move forward.
Can we ask someone to turn the thing down? Cheers. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a really quick contribution. First and foremost, what we've seen over the last couple of months is massive attacks upon the internet. In the United States, they pushed through the SOPA laws, and here in Europe, they have tried to push through the ACTA laws, both which actually show that the internet is not run in some Creative Commons or whatever, but actually, when governments seek to run it, seek to implement the laws of copyright, etc., they actually protect the 1%. So you can see, for example, that downloading music has become much more difficult, and etc. That has created massive movements across the globe, which have actually challenged the existing order of things. And I was on one of the demonstrations. I was on one of the demonstrations here in London, and what became very clear is that no one on the demonstration itself held the kind of view that somehow capitalism it doesn't exist in the internet or whatsoever, but is very much married to the internet. The second point that I wanted to make is about the question of Twitter and the Arab revolutions, because it's somehow very disgraceful when you hear Western commentators say that, because these kind of backward people in the Orient and in the Arab world somehow acquired Western technologies, suddenly they were able to overthrow their regimes. What we need to be saying is that it's actually people like us in the streets of Tahrir, in the factories of Mahala al-Kubra, that have actually brought about the revolution rather than Twitter itself. And the argument is quite important to make, because even though they had these technologies, when the internet was shut down by Mubarak and Vodafone sent through text messages after text messages saying go back to your own places, actually the demonstrations grew much stronger, and the strikes in the factories of Mahala and Cairo actually started to break the camel's back. On a final question, on a final note, it's quite interesting to see the new kind of so-called horizontalist movements of Occupy actually placing a very great emphasis upon using newspapers, such as Occupied Times, as well as producing leaflets like these. If the internet could, solve all the questions of leaflets and of propaganda one-to-one, actually they wouldn't have to produce these. But even activists in these movements recognize the very need that we need to produce and have one-to-one conversations in order to defeat the governments and their austerity agendas.
I'm looking for any other, yes. Yeah. Anybody else want to indicate?
Yes, I think there's 2 points of view that we need to avoid in this discussion. One is the utopian view that the internet, in and of itself, is a technological or information revolution that will solve problems that the left has been unable to solve previously. That simply isn't the case. No technological change can, in and of itself, solve a political or an economic problem. And I think Gholam did a very good job of kind of nailing a number of the kind of utopian myths about the internet which exist. But I think it's also important that once that area of debate has been cleared, once we understand that that's not the terms on which we want to have a useful discussion about the internet on the left, it's also important to rule out another almost equally prevalent, at least among the left view, and that's the kind of Luddite view that nothing has changed. That we've lived through this enormous technological revolution, that the way in which actually each and every individual is actually communicating, is actually hearing about the news, is actually using it to organise politically, that nothing has happened. You know, this would have been inconceivable in previous technological revolution. It was inconceivable that after the levelers started using the printing press, using the pamphlet, using the petition in a printed form, that after that people said, nothing's changed, just like it was back in the day of the Lollards. Or that once the left started using mass circulation newspapers, that people said, no, it's just the same as it was before mass circulation newspaper. No, that isn't true. Something has changed here. The technology has changed, and people are using it, actually, even while they're denying, in theory, that they are using it. Now, that's a rather silly place to get yourself into. You need to be able to theorise what you're actually practically doing. And to do that, you have to understand that some things have changed. Speed of communication and distribution of knowledge have been accelerated by this technological revolution. That's simply a factual statement. That makes some difference. It is not true that the ridiculously easy group formation that Clay Shirky talks about leads to ridiculously easy organisational formulation. But it is a step towards that. A group isn't an organisation, a group isn't a movement, a group isn't a strike, a group isn't a campaign, but it is a step in that direction. And once you make that step, if you embrace using that technology to make that step, then the other possibilities open up on the basis of it. Now, we haven't fully explored this. We're in the very early stages, actually, of a technological revolution. We're in the first decade of this technological revolution, and as always, the ruling class and the rich and the powerful have greater access and greater use of this than we do. But we have some use of it, and so to be able to think through what it now means to build organisation, to build campaigns using this technology is a challenge to the left, and it can't be met by saying, wow, nothing's really happened here.
Hi, I'm Susan Butler from Goldsmiths, and I was interested in what the first contributor had to say about the ways in which digital technologies are kind of changing our mindset and attention span, and I suppose there's no real good answer for that, but I'm also wondering about the implications of our internet mindset on the idea of paying for labor. I think that we're very much used to not paying for content and not paying for music, not paying for television, and in many ways the dissemination of these things is great, but if you're someone who has to work for wages, then where does that put you in terms of being able to produce content for free? And I think this isn't just a question for the for the internet, but this is also taking place in art schools now that you have to pay exorbitant wages and become a debt slave in order to sort of become established as an artist. And now our artistic production will be in the hands of the leisured classes. How do we keep the internet democratic rather than so much in the hands of leisured classes?
I won't use the microphone, thank you, that's too high tech for me, I'll just rely on my voice.
I think it's important to recognize that what we debate at the moment, the internet, is such a kind of huge monster with different kind of functions, different aspects, different kind of anyway elements. I mean, you're right in terms of if you using many of those kind of anyway tools. We know that there isn't much you can say on Facebook, or there is very little that you could kind of anyway argue and discuss in the case of the Twitter and so on and so forth. People who put interesting materials on the Facebook is usually linked from, let's say, a website or a newspapers or another organization. Somebody has done a great deal of research, has produced a magnificent, let's say, critique of the crisis in Greece or the uprising in the Arab world and so on, and so we just basically go and actually put it up there. So in terms of the discussion usually actually takes place some other places and at a great length and in some more detail. And many of those tools can be used for bits and pieces, but yes, you're right. If we rely for our kind of anyway discussions on few comments and like or dislike on Facebook, there isn't really much to debate as such. It's just going to be so shallow and without much of a substance. So I think that's a fair point. Different technologies and different tools have a different function. A very interesting point raised by John in terms of, I think that's a very good way of putting it, and I agree with that. There are kind of anyway two aspects of it, which raises a very important question, or rather kind of it reminds me that we have been there before as well. I mean, without a doubt, internet in terms of the potential and the possibilities is a fantastic medium, and it can do a lot. But you go back and they debate about, let's say, the newspapers, or read the magnificent piece by Bertolt Brecht on the function of the radio. We've had that discussion before. It has happened before. Every single technology, we've just been, isn't it brilliant if it was this or that, or if we could do this or that, which raises a kind of an important question for us, that internet, or actually democratization of the internet, also remains a crucial kind of struggle and fight that we have on our hands. It's not so much actually what the revolution kind of with the internet can contribute, but in order for internet to realize its potential, I think it's very, very important to fight precisely for that, not internet going down the same route as, let's say, the press or the radio or television, because we have been there before. I mean, if you look at the recent examples of the way that Obama started a brilliant campaign, one of his promises was the free internet activities, and then WikiLeaks come and we have that absolute mess on our hand. And in some of the cases we have seen level of control, level of exercise. The point that was raised by one of the speakers in terms of internet being monitored, again, we have a number of examples. A bookstore seller or somebody was working in a bookstore, I think in Edinburgh a few years ago, was sacked because he wrote some unsavory comments about his boss. 2 lads were arrested, I think during the riots in Birmingham, because they invited some other people to join them for a riot, and actually they turned up, plus a number of police officers. Many people have been arrested in airports. We know that because they tweeted about this or that. So I think the issues of actually turning internet into a creative, open platform, a truly democratic platform, is also one of the key struggles. So it's not just a question actually whether we can use the internet. In order for us to be able to use the internet, I think it's important to fight for the internet. So it's not going to go down the same route as television, as radio, as the newspaper.
Thank you very much. Hand over to Clare.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me without the microphone? Because I hate that. Okay, just 3 quick points really. One about the monitoring. I mean, they've always monitored us. They're always watching what we're doing. They don't want us to take away the power that they have in their hands. They don't want us to challenge them, which is one of the reasons why I think actually it is really important that we do use the internet, that we do get our points across, but actually, and also to organise openly. To organise in secret, often you'll get infiltrated by the police if it's a secret group, but to say, look, we're going to have a mass demonstration and we want thousands and thousands of people on the streets to put up posters, to put up leaflets, is the same thing for me to do it on the internet, to be open and try and reach as many people as possible. A comrade in Egypt again, Hossam, he was one that said to me, actually, he wants to be on the internet as often as, not as often as possible, but if he's on the internet often, people know where he is. They know that he's safe, that the police haven't got him, and if he ever disappears from the internet, even if it's a text that he sent from his phone to Twitter or whatever, then they know that something's happened to him. In fact, just a couple of weeks later, one of their friends, was a journalist, did disappear off Twitter, and they all rushed down to the police station and managed to save him. So I don't think we can hide. I don't think we can not use the internet. I think we just have to be, open and loud, really, and speak to as many people as possible. The Twitter revolutions, Facebook revolutions, I mean, you know, they do, like you said, you know, it's a bit patronising, racist, orientalist, whatever you want to call it, to say that it's Twitter that caused the revolutions. No, it's not. Of course it's not. It's the struggle by the people. It's the people that are, you know, that are causing the revolutions. It's the people that are making the Twitter comments. It's the people with their hands, you know, that are writing on Facebook. It's even people that make the internet, that make the cords, the cables, the plugs. It's humans all the way along the line that are actually, you know, not controlling, but, you know, contributing to the internet. It's not the internet itself that has caused the revolution, but it does obviously help them communicate. And just finally, the point about the organisation around whether newspapers, whether, you know, websites and whatever. I mean, I'm part of an organisation that does have an online publication and a free broadsheet that we hand out. We find that does help us reach people that often newspapers, revolutionary newspapers, don't reach. We've got a majority of our people that we've met through Facebook, through YouTube. Owen Price, we've met, that spoke earlier, we met him on the internet. And, you know, I'm not saying it's one or the other. It's not papers or websites, but it certainly does help us communicate with a broader layer of people, and it helps us function our organisation. And we do, you know, have a very democratic organisation. We're very open, and people are welcome to contribute as much as they want, with its photos, articles, all of these things that Gramsci says we need to leave behind records of what we're doing. Otherwise, people think there is no conscious leadership. So please do contribute to whatever we're doing, and thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks very much to both our speakers. I hope you've enjoyed the session and that you continue to enjoy the rest of the day.